Hello, and welcome to the next week of our course. This session is fully focused on the importance of self-care for professionals who work with elderly victims of abuse. Healthcare centers, emergency departments, social and home care services are at the forefront of efforts to identify and prevent violence against older persons. Violence is a complex issue which requires sensitive and skillful handling by social workers and healthcare professionals. These professionals in turn require the support of their organizations. Professionals should understand that working with victims of violence differs from working with other groups. Professionals might be influenced by their own experiences of violence, their attitudes and values, and working with older victims of violence can create ambivalent feelings. For example, professionals might experience the following: a feeling that they do not have adequate skills for handling the situation, feelings of helplessness or withdrawal from the case due to the realization that there are no easy or quick solutions, fear of the perpetrator, anger, frustration, confusion, overprotectiveness, empathy. All of listed emotions can be present at the same time. A feeling of knowing what is best to solve the problem, frustration at the poor quality of support services or at the lack of support from other professionals. The emotional and psychological risks associated with direct work to vulnerable people have been largely overlooked in professional training. However, it is crucial that practitioners understand the risks and associated symptoms in order to prevent and minimize the effects on their well-being and work. For example, secondary traumatization is known as one of the most common responses of people who work with trauma survivors. It is a result of an empathic relationship with an individual who has experienced trauma when a professional becomes a witness to their horrific suffering. In such cases, a professional wants to help their client, but eventually might also develop a number of PTSD symptoms. There are two groups of symptoms of secondary traumatization: physical and behavior. First group includes exhaustion, insomnia, headaches, sore back and neck, rashes, breakouts, hypochondria, and so on. Behavioral symptoms are increased use of alcohol and drugs, anger and irritability, avoidance of patients and colleagues, as well as any staff gatherings and social events. Feelings of helplessness, guilt, difficulties with decision-making, negative self-image, emotional exhaustion, increased anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, feeling of being unskilled in your job, thoughts to quit it, problems in personal life, eating issues. As you can see, those symptoms in fact resemble the ones that survivors of trauma have. It is crucial for professionals and their colleagues to pay attention to the warning signs. Otherwise, the consequences can be very serious. Other common responses that professionals might face are compassion fatigue and burnout. Compassion fatigue is an experience of emotional and physical exhaustion that our professionals have due to the long-term use of empathy while treating the patients. This syndrome combines the symptoms of secondary traumatic stress and professional burnout. Compassion fatigue differs from vicarious traumatization by being a more general phenomenon that refers to the overall emotional and physical exhaustion. Professional burnout is a gradual process which occurs when work-related stress, caused by the repeated use of empathy, combined with the day-to-day workplace challenges and hustle, results in emotional and physical exhaustion. Professional burnout is similar to compassion fatigue, since it does not require direct contact with trauma survivors. However, in contrast to compassion fatigue and vicarious traumatization, which might occur suddenly, professional burnout develops over time. Professional burnout can be experienced by workers who have low job satisfaction, feel powerless, and are overwhelmed at work. It might be caused by lack of role clarity and large amount of work, large flows of information, financial constraints, shift work, lack of continuous education, poor communication, and lack of support from colleagues. Organizations should acknowledge the existence of vicarious trauma, secondary traumatic stress, and compassion fatigue, view them as normal reactions to working with trauma survivors, and help their workers cope with them. This will ease stigmas that professionals might experience if they feel incapable of dealing with a case that involves trauma survivors. Protective factors for vicarious traumatization, secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue, and professional burnout can reduce the likelihood of their occurrence. They exist in two levels. First one is macro, organizational level. The second one is individual. Protective factors on the organizational level include safe, comfortable, and friendly working environment in which professionals can express their fears and concerns, provision of support to employees, encouragement to take care of themselves and maintain work-life balance, training in working with trauma survivors, possibility to receive formal advice from expert workers or organizations, provision of formal and informal support to individuals who need to process their clients' traumatic experiences, for example, regular consultations with peers and supervisors, possibility to work on a diverse range of cases, creation of professional networks, regular use of tools such as the Maslow Burnout Inventory, secondary traumatic stress scale, and professional quality of life scale to assess professionals. On the individual level, there are different protective factors that include utilization of skills and strategies to satisfy one's personal, social, and mental needs while meeting the needs of clients, development of coping skills, realistic workload goals, sufficient rest and relaxation, including during lunch breaks, asking for and receiving support from colleagues if needed, appreciating the little things, for example, a cup of tea, hearing the sound of the wind in the trees, or developing connections with others, maintaining social contacts, gathering with friends to celebrate holidays, joys, and mourn losses, expressing oneself through creative activities, for example, journal writing, drawing, dancing, singing, and so on. Taking time to reflect on one's experiences and express gratitude by reading, writing, praying, or meditating. Psychotherapy if needed, especially if a person has experienced trauma in the past. To minimize the symptoms of professional challenges on the organizational level, every health and social care organization should have guidelines in place on how to react to and report elder abuse. The objectives of such guidelines or protocol are to ensure the dignity and respect of older people accessing services, to protect and support employees and volunteers in situations when abuse is suspected, witnessed, or disclosed, to clarify roles and responsibilities of volunteers, staff, and management in situations when abuse is suspected, witnessed, or disclosed. To achieve a unified and consistent approach to the management of elder abuse cases. To reflect interagency and multi-professional responsibilities of all agencies in responding and preventing elder abuse. In fact, developing guidelines is not enough. All new and existing staff members, including volunteers, should be regularly trained on how to use them. It is also recommended to include elder abuse as a permanent agenda item at relevant staff meetings and to regularly review the guidelines for any updates. Professionals of health and social care might become victims of abuse themselves. It can be in various forms: verbal or non-verbal threats, humiliation, harassment or physical assaults coming from colleagues, managers, supervisors or patients. Workplace violence is a serious issue that is usually underreported. It leads to higher risks of professional burnout within the staff of the organization. Therefore, to ensure safety of employees and volunteers, it is very important to have a safe workspace with a clear policy of zero tolerance for violence. In order to successfully implement this policy in your organization, make sure to provide appropriate training for the employees concerning identification of workplace violence. Create clear guidelines on how to react to violent situations, for example, an alarm system or other security devices. Encourage employees to promptly report incidents, no matter how big or small the issue is. Investigate all the reports and guarantee that the perpetrator faces the consequences. Provide a comfortable environment in waiting rooms for clients. They should be designed to minimize stress. Ensure that counseling or patient care rooms have 2 exits. Develop cooperation with police. As you can see, prevention and minimalization of professional challenges related to working with elderly victims of abuse is not only personal responsibility of the professionals themselves, but their organization, employer as well. This is it for today's session. I hope you found it useful and will be able to implement those principles in your professional life. Please don't forget to do the weekly assignment before the next session. Goodbye.